Good morning. Today we're going to talk about Nahum chapter 2, and if chapter 1 was a kind of a prelude to the overthrowing of Nineveh, chapters 2 and 3 provide the details. And it's noted here that it was not Israel's pride that was at stake. They were a puppet nation to Nineveh and Assyria at this point, but their pride is not at stake. What's at stake here is God's honor. Nineveh has been given a chance to live a good life, to repent of their evil ways, and they have not. So at this point, go ahead and pause me and read chapter 2. So in verse 1, ironically, Nahum calls on Nineveh to get ready for battle because it's coming, so you better get ready. And in verse 2, there's some controversy here over the splendor of Jacob being restored. So Jacob is the biological, if you will, the family name of Israel. It is the name that Jacob was given at birth. It's his birth name. But Israel is the spiritual name of that country and that people. And it says that they will be returned to their splendor. So this includes all 12 tribes, not just Judah, who is the puppet nation at this point, but all of Israel. So when is that going to happen? It obviously has not happened yet with the 10 tribes lost. And verse 3 through 10 gives the details that we were talking about earlier. So in verse 3, it talks about the scarlet that the warriors are clad in, the enemies, and scarlet was the favored color of the Medes and the actual color of their uniforms. In verse 4, it talks about flaming torches on chariots, and found this interesting again, a little bit of indecision among the scholars as to what this means. Some thought it meant because the battle happened at night that the charioteers were actually carrying torches, or some thought that it was the sun glinting off the chariots, and some thought it was a prophecy about electric cars. So for what that's worth. In verse 5, it talks about the troops stumbling, so they're halfway drunk, or maybe all the way drunk. And if you'll remember the story we talked about yesterday in Nahum 1, they were feasting when the flood came and washed some of the walls away. And at this feast, they were obviously getting pretty drunk. They thought they had won a major battle. They had won a major battle. In verse 6, we're not sure how these gates were opened. They were opened. The flood may have opened them. The enemies may have gotten in and opened more of them after the initial flood. So Nineveh, if you look at a map of old Nineveh, the Koshar, or some call it the Chaser tributary, ran right through the middle of Nineveh. The walls actually ran over it, and it ran right through the middle. And in addition, there's an aqueduct coming in from the east, and then there's a moat around 3/4 of the city in addition to that, and the confluence where the Tigris, the Chaser, and the Hadagar tributary was within a mile of the palace. So, I mean, this is a big deal. The Tigris is a huge river. So these tributaries are where they're splitting off. That's all within less than a mile. So there's lots of opportunities for flooding here. We'll talk about a little bit more of that in just a second in verse 8. But verse 7 says it's decreed. God said it. So it's going to happen. It's decreed. And the slave girls mentioned in 7 could be referring to the queen. Most people think that's not what that's referring to. It could be referring to Ishtar, who was their goddess. moaning, but probably what it means is the female devotees of Ishtar. So they had these sacred prostitutes. So they're the ones that are probably, beating their breast and moaning like doves. And verse 8, going back to the water thing, the palace, it said, was slightly elevated. So how much of it was flooded is questionable. But it was said to have been built out of sun-dried bricks. So maybe the floodwaters just got into the foundation enough that the whole palace just dropped. Again, nobody knows, and then there's the story that the palace was burned, so there's a little bit of controversy on all that. Verse 8 and 9, and please note that none of those options are great. If any of those are happening to you in your country, in your home, in your capital, those are not great things, any of them. But verse 8 and 9 show what's happening. It's chaos. People are fleeing everywhere. They're looting. They're grabbing anything they can. I mean, there's plenty of wealth there. This is the wealthiest nation at the time. These people rulers have been looting and plundering other countries. So they've got a world of wealth. And these people these Ninevites are like, okay, I may have been bad, but I got to get out of here, and I got to provide for my family, so I'm going to take what I can get. Or they're just, I don't have to provide for anybody, I just want as much as I can get. I don't know, but put yourself in their place. Prisoners now finding themselves free. They got nothing. It's just the looting, the plundering by the people. I don't know. In verse 10, it just kind of stops. I mean, this is it. This is the end. They're pillaged, plundered, and stripped. That's an NIV version. Another version says Nineveh is empty, void, and waste. So all this, and it comes down to they're nothing. And I think I told you yesterday it took 2,400 years just to find the ruins of Nineveh. So in kind of summary of that part, one of the commentators said the city gates were open to a mighty army still present. So the Medes and the Babylonians are outside, and they've just gotten beat. In fact, they've just gotten beat for the third time, but they're still outside the gates and have the siege on Nineveh. And they said, so the gates are open and the army's still present and ready to take advantage of an opportunity that was totally unexpected by the besieged and by the besiegers. So just a little prophecy that we need to be ready. We don't know what's going to happen, but be ready to take up God's opportunity and be ready to take a victory in Him. To finish out the chapter, verses 11 and 12 talk about Assyria like a lion and a lion's den. So filling his lairs with kill and the dens with prey. So a real lion's den, I'm told, never seen one, is filled with remains of dead carcasses and decay, and it's pretty gross. It's not like the Lion King. It's pretty filthy. So that was an apt description of Nineveh at that time. They're just filthy. And in verse 13, God says, I'm against you. And I would hate for God to say, Pat, I'm against you. I'm against you. I'll burn up your chariots. Again, we talk about the palace possibly being burned. And the voices of your messengers will no longer be heard. In other words, you're going to be silenced. So that's chapter 2, and next we'll take chapter 3. See you then.